trying to do that and will continue to do so.
Nancy, and then Craig.
Nancy Marshall-Genzer with Marketplace. We talked about the risk of tightening too early. What about the risk of waiting too long, especially since it can take a while for Fed actions to work their way through the economy?
Well, I agree with that. Many studies over decades and decades have showed that there are lags in the way monetary policy affects the economy, and therefore monetary policy does have to be forward-looking. That's why we spend so much time preparing forecasts and discussing them, and we want to put in place a policy that will be appropriate for where the economy is heading. That is a reason that many of my colleagues, most of my colleagues, are anticipating that it will be appropriate to begin to tighten policy sometime this year, in spite of the fact that they are projecting that inflation will be low. They're looking forward and they see that by the end of 2016 or 2017, with the labor market recovering, and assuming that inflation expectations remain stable and transitory influences no longer affecting inflation, they see inflation heading back to our 2% objective. So just as we don't want to be premature in tightening policy and aborting a recovery that we have worked long and hard to proceed as far as it has, we also don't want to be behind the curve in beginning to tighten given those lags.
Madam Chair, I'd like to preface this by saying I do believe you stand for accountability. And so recently a bunch of us were in a room over there. There was a police guard outside, and your staff had taken our cell phones and they controlled the internet in the room. All this to guard the security of the FOMC statement. If one of us had leaked it, we would lose our jobs. Surely there would be a prosecution, and my friends here in the press would certainly have a banner day with that story. There was a leak in the FOMC. We don't know what happened. I've asked. I can't get an answer. And now Congress is asking. Both parties want to know. I'm not going to ask about the IG's probe. I understand that's an active case now, suddenly, after 2 years of just sitting there. But I would like to ask what you found at the board. You weren't chairman then. You were vice chair, I believe. So what answers do you have, and are you going to respond to Congress?
So let me say that the committee and I personally take very seriously our responsibility to safeguard confidential information. We have a set of policies and procedures that are in place that we're to follow if we believe that there have been leaks of confidential information, and this is something that doesn't occur very often, but if it does occur, we follow those procedures. It has been reported that our Inspector General is engaged in a review at this time of this matter, and in light of that ongoing review, I'm not going to get into details, but let me just say that we welcome that review and are looking forward to its conclusions. With respect to Congress, congressional inquiries, we have arranged to brief members of Congress who've asked about this and will certainly cooperate in trying to provide them the information that they seek.
Okay, John Heltman.
Madam Chair, thanks for taking my question. The banking sector has clearly improved since the crisis in terms of retention, but there's also seemingly a number of scandals involving Forex manipulation, of course, LIBOR. Do you think that the culture at the banks is where it ought to be? And if not, what is the Fed going to do to improve it and when?
Well, it's certainly been it's certainly been very disappointing to see what have been some really brazen violations of the law. And we absolutely expect the banks that we supervise to comply with the law and to have in place controls that ensure compliance in organizations. And while changing the culture of organizations is not something that we can achieve through supervision, we will make sure that the banks that we supervise have appropriate compliance regimes in place, and to the extent that compensation schemes might be incenting such behavior that inappropriately reward risk-taking, that's something that we will, look for in our supervision as well.
When you introduced a compensation rule in 2011, when do you think we might see some movement on that rule?
Well, the agencies are working jointly to bring out a rule on this, but we do have supervisory policies in place concerning the structure of incentive pay and compensation, and our supervision covers that topic now, and we have seen, I think, meaningful changes already in the structure of compensation in banking organizations to diminish ways in which it might incent risk-taking.
Okay. Pedro and Steve Beckner.
Pedro DaCosta with Dow Jones Newswires. I guess I have two follow-ups. One with regard to Craig's question. So before the IG's investigation, according to Republican Congressman Hensarling's letter to your office, he says that it is my understanding that although the Federal Reserve's General Counsel was initially involved in this investigation, the inquiry was dropped at the request of several members of the FOMC. Now, that predates the IG. I want to know if you could tell us who are these members of the FOMC who struck down in this investigation, and doesn't not revealing these facts kind of go directly against the sort of transparency and accountability that you're trying to bring to the central bank?
That is an allegation that I don't believe has any basis in fact. I'm not going to go into the details, but I don't know where that piece of information could possibly have come from.
If I can follow up on his question, I think when you get asked about financial crimes and the public hears you talk about compliance, you get a sense that there's not enough enforcement involved in these actions, and that it's merely a case of kind of trying to achieve settlements after the fact. Is there a sense in the regulatory community that financial crimes need to be punished sort of more forcefully in order for there to be an actual deterrent against unethical behavior?
So you're talking about within banking organizations. So the focus of regulators, the banking regulators, is safety and soundness. And what we want to see is changes made as rapidly as possible that will eliminate practices that are unsafe and unsound. We can't, only the Justice Department can bring criminal action, and they have taken up cases where they think that that's appropriate. In some situations, when we are able to identify individuals who are responsible for misdeeds, we can put in place prohibitions that bar them from participating in banking, and we have done so and will continue to do so.
Steve Beckner of MNI. Good afternoon, Madam Chair. The FOMC said last September that it will wait till after the first rate hike to stop or to discontinue reinvesting proceeds of its MBS holdings and stop rolling over maturing treasuries. what is the FOMC's current thinking about how long after liftoff you should wait to stop reinvestments and rollovers? And given the very large amounts of treasuries maturing next year, would it make sense for the FOMC to vary the pace of runoff that it allows?
So we issued in September a set of normalization principles, and as you noted, the committee indicated that we will eventually cease reinvestments or diminish the pace of reinvestments as a way of gradually reducing the size of our portfolio over time. We said we would do that when economic conditions were appropriate after we begin raising rates, because we want changes in our target range for the federal funds rate to be the main tool by which we shift the stance of monetary policy. We've not made any decision at this point about how long it will be once we begin to raise rates before we reduce or cease reinvestment. We will see how things go, and the committee will revisit that and make a decision at a later time. You also indicated that we have a substantial quantity of treasuries that will roll off our balance sheet over the next several years. That's true, and that will, I think over the next 2 years, almost $800 billion will mature, and that they will be short-term, obviously, treasuries at that point, and that's a way in which we anticipate diminishing the size of our portfolio.
But can I follow up, please? Some people have suggested that you might need to manage those runoffs a little more granularly, if that's a word, perhaps pursue a different track for treasuries versus MBS, or, given quarters when you have a very large amounts maturing and there might be a spike in long-term interest rates, that maybe you would vary the rate of runoff. Is that any consideration given to that?
That's something for which we've made no plans, and I don't really have anything for you on that.
Okay, Greg, and then Peter.
Greg Robb from MarketWatch. We hear that productivity takes a long time before you can understand it, but it's been very low in this cycle. What does that mean for Fed policy?
Well, I agree. It has been very low. It's been disappointingly low. A positive aspect of what is fundamentally a disappointment is that the labor market has improved more rapidly than might have been expected given the pace of economic growth. So the unemployment rate has come down more rapidly than I would have expected, and the labor market has improved more rapidly than I would have expected. We have written down our estimates of potential output. In the long run, it is a disappointing factor about the ultimate prospects for the U.S. economy if it continues. I would expect it to pick up, and as you can see from the longer-run growth projections, most FOMC participants believe it will pick up above current levels. But it means it's something that would, if it persists, retard living standards and would likely retard real wage growth and improvement in living standards for ordinary households.
Okay, Peter, last question.
Peter Cook with Bloomberg Television. Madam Chair, one clarification, if I could, logistically, and then a question about Congress, a follow-up. First of all, you've been asked this before. I just want to see if we can clarify. when you decide to start raising interest rates, could that decision happen at a meeting in which it's not followed by a press conference? And on my congressional question,